Welcome to the program. One of the key factors in Labor's victory at the last election was its vigorous campaign against the Coalition's work choices, which the government succeeded in overturning in March with the passage through Parliament of its so-called Fair Work Bill. Some critics argue the bargaining power scales have now tipped too far towards unions and away from employers. But there are serious union allegations of widespread rorting by subcontractors on building sites, making it easy for labourers to be exploited by unscrupulous intermediaries. Many are recent immigrants with poor language skills, and the adequacy of scrutiny by Australian immigration authorities has been called into question. Business editor Greg Hoy reports.
Last month, 980,700 Australians were employed in the construction industry. But at the bottom of the construction ladder hierarchy, amongst the builders' labourers, there's an increasing tragedy emerging that's not so flattering to the modern image of Australia.
So how long you haven't been paid for?
6 weeks.
6 weeks?
Yeah.
You're owed how much?
80.
80?
Yeah.
80 what?
$80,000.
$80,000?
For 10 workers, actually.
For 10 workers?
Yeah.
So it makes it very difficult, and then if they tell you, all right, it'll be in 6 months, but, tomorrow, Monday.
Subcontractors are employing people that aren't receiving super, aren't receiving long service leave, aren't receiving any form of entitlement. They're not paying tax. They're not getting nothing.
So how could this happen in modern Australia? Quite simply, as developers award contracts to the lowest bidder, intermediaries or subcontractors, who themselves might be adequately paid, then employ labourers, but only after those labourers are helped to register as a business with the Australian Tax Office, and so have an Australian business number or ABN. The effect is to negate legal workers' entitlements, underpay the workers and profit from the difference. And it appears that even under a Labor government, this is happening on a large scale.
Some 116,000 people holding ABN numbers described their classification or their work as labourer. So essentially there is a widespread culture now out there of no ABN, no start, and unfortunately there is a very large sum of tax being avoided. There are widespread bogus arrangements, and the government really needs to start to focus on this area.
It seems a far cry from the big election promises made when a then Labor opposition campaigned for government.
And we believe in protecting those who can't stand up for themselves. We believe in a decent safety net and a decent standard of living for all working families.
You're owed $113,000.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
For how long?
6 weeks.
6 months?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. So he owes you $20,000.
Yeah.
The 7:30 report asked if the Employment Minister Julia Gillard would like to comment on the problem of labourers being forced to acquire ABNs to circumvent their entitlements. The reply, quote, "The Minister is unlikely to be available. We can confirm, however, that these concerns have been raised directly with the Minister. The Fair Work Act provides strong protections against sham contracting, which should be reported to the Fair Work Ombudsman."
If one of these workers steps forward and is seen to be the worker complaining, the boss will no longer sponsor that worker, or he'll tell the Department of Immigration, and the poor sod will be kicked out of the country in a flash. So these workers are very vulnerable. They're the most vulnerable workers you can imagine.
Exploitation examples abound. Recently, 150 Chinese plasterers who'd been underpaid were found at 2 large Sydney construction sites. Like these migrants, they had not been paid for weeks.
Their immediate boss had a workers' comp policy for 1 worker, but was employing 150 workers. Their boss, of course, had paid no superannuation for these Chinese workers. As I say, they hadn't been paid for 6 weeks. Their rates of pay, by and large, were far below what a comparable Australian worker was getting for similar work.
According to unions, amongst another such group discovered recently, 25 were found to have outdated 457 or temporary work visas. 40 more, according to unions, were found by the Immigration Department to be illegal immigrants, and 30 could simply not be identified.
The new element we're seeing a lot more of late is illegal migrant workers.
They're not entering illegally, but they're then not meeting their visa conditions, and we obviously then have to locate them and remove them if they haven't met those visa conditions. But we have had some organised rackets, there's no question, largely involving Malaysian and Chinese nationals. And we work as closely as we can with employers, with trade unions and with state authorities to try and stamp this out.
While so much is made of the number of boat people reaching Australia, this issue has gone comparatively unnoticed by the public. Last year's figures aren't available, but in 2007 the Immigration Department located 10,722 illegal immigrants after 154 investigations. As part of a multi-scale compliance operation in March, immigration officers raided this residence in Wagga, New South Wales. The operation cracked an alleged labour hire and identity fraud racket, where an intermediary was allegedly bringing Chinese foreign workers into Australia using fraudulent identification to provide staff illegally to the meatworks industry. Construction unions say they've been told the same thing is happening in their industry.
There's plenty of young Australians out there that would absolutely give their right arm to be employed, but they're not, because the fact is it's a lot cheaper to bring labour in from overseas to make sure that you can exploit them and put them in that situation, which cheap prices undercut the market and everybody misses out.
Construction is probably the third ranked industry, largely in the agriculture, meat processing, fruit picking, but also in restaurant and catering. In the meat industry, there was a very organised racket across 3 or 4 states involving hundreds of people, and we managed to detect and break that up, but it was a big operation, and it just shows the sophistication of some of these organised rackets.
It's a scandal that can embarrass the largest and most respected developers. This site, developed by Grindley Constructions, whose executive director, Martin Patience, is vice president of the Master Builders Association of Australia. Blaming Chinese body hire companies, Mr. Patience would not be interviewed, nor would Grollo Constructions, one of Australia's largest builders, after similar problems emerged on this construction of a luxury apartment tower overlooking Sydney's Hyde Park.
Very often, maybe the managing director or the CEO didn't know about it, but the site project manager who let the contract, often these contracts are let at a very cheap price, or the site supervisor or foreman who every day watched a strange group of workers coming onto the site. They're bringing the project in under budget, and that becomes the dominant factor rather than whether some group of Chinese workers are being mistreated.
So who are the labour hire intermediaries allegedly shortchanging their workers? There are many. This is the formidable Linda Jiang of building subcontractor LCJ. Amongst other disputes, unions say they've pursued her for unpaid wages for 40 Chinese workers owed $250,000.
Where you come from?
Unions allege Ms. Jiang insists her Chinese workers have ABNs, referring to them as subcontractors. In broken English, Linda Jiang told us she would not be interviewed, nor would various site managers.
Well, come on, Jim.
I'll come back. I'll talk to you.
Jim, I need you to come back, mate. We need to sort this problem out. Come on, this is about workers' entitlements, about workers' rights, right? People that haven't got paid, they can't put food on the table. Jim, we can't wait another 6 weeks.
But sadly for him, Tony Monk, manager of Dutch Harbour Constructions, was caught in the glare of our cameras when unions raided his site.
We need to know when these blokes are going to get paid, Tony. There is over $300,000 that's owed just amongst these men here. Around $300,000. Okay? When are they going to be paid?
They're going to be paid in total within about 6 weeks.
What do you mean? They've already been waiting 6 weeks for their pay.
I can do nothing more. They're going to be paid in full.
But Tony, I've just had a discussion with the builder.
Yeah.
He says to me that they've paid you for all the progress payments on their jobs.
They have been assisting me in payments, yes. There's a huge difference between haven't paid and intend to pay. Have I denied at any stage that these guys won't get paid? I'm not turning around and say that Dutch Harbour's going to close its doors and turn its back on everything. Dutch Harbour's in there fighting for its survival. It has a cash flow problem.
It's an issue that's got to be fixed by legislation.
The union movement has long been calling on government for action on several fronts.
There has to be changes to the law in the taxation area. We have to have much stronger immigration arrangements in place. Government has to be serious about compliance. The wrought merchants are just getting a free kick at the moment because government doesn't take the whole issue seriously.
Well, I don't think that's right at all. I mean, we've had good engagement with the union since the change of government to try and stamp out this practice. We've just passed the Worker Protection Act, which gives us greater powers to ensure that overseas workers are treated properly, but also that we can deal with any breaches by employers of their obligations. I'm very strong on integrity in the system, and we'll continue to take any assistance we can from trade unions or anyone else in making sure we stamp out unlawful activity.